All right, hello everyone. We're right at about time to start. We'll give a couple minutes for people to filter in. And so this is IAB Open. This is our second session where we're going to be going in depth on the WSIS plus 20 process. So thank you all for being here, and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, let's get started. All right. Hello, everyone. This is our second session of IAB Open, where we're going to be going into WSIS plus 20 discussion. I'm Tommy Pauly. I'm the IAB chair, and I'm joined by Alvaro Rotano. As with all of our meetings, this meeting is covered by the IETF Note Well. These are the conditions under which we participate in the IETF. Please make sure you're familiar with this and all the documents listed here. So I'm going to go jump right into our agenda for today. And Alvaro, if you want to give a intro to what we're going to be talking about here, that'd be great.
Sure. So we mentioned this a little bit yesterday. Today we're going to focus on WSIS plus 20. WSIS is the World Summit on the Information Society. It is a UN-sponsored multi-stakeholder process that was put into place 20 years ago. That's what the plus 20 means. So this year, in July, I believe, there's going to be a review of where we are in WSIS plus 20. So what we're going to do today is provide some background and talk about what has been the evolution up to now. And we're going to talk about, and Ian Sheldon from Australia is going to give us a government perspective, and then we're going to give you some ideas on what the role of the IETF is. And at the end, we're going to have some extra time for discussion. So I believe we can start, Olaf.
Fair to say that Mark will not be coming here, but that you will do that IETF thing. Anyway, my name is Olaf Kolkman. I'm Principal of Internet Technology Policy and Advocacy at the Internet Society. This is work that we are doing with the IAB in the IAB ISOC Coordination Group. And I'm going to skip 2 slides forward because I first want to talk a little bit about why this session. This ISOC IAB, feel it's important to inform you about a process that might impact the Internet's future. And I'm going to explain why that might be the case. We want to arm you with a set of talking points with which you can engage with, for instance, your local governments, national, regional, in local processes such as consultations, or for instance, your national or regional IGF, and help the IAB and IETF people that engage in these global processes to be armed with a number of speaking points. And those speaking points is what Alvaro will share later. And we want to do this because we really, really care. So this is basically a call for action, partly, but also sort of an explanation and a tutorial. So this is about the World Summit of the Information Society. That was a process, a governmental process that took 2 years, 2003 to 2005, and preparations, therefore. And it consisted out of 2 phases. First, the Geneva Plan of Action, which basically set a number of action items to further the use of ICTs globally. If you see information society in this, think about the digital society. The Geneva Action was followed up with a second summit called the Tunis meeting. It was held in Tunis, obviously. And out of that meeting came the Tunis Agenda. And the Tunis Agenda confirmed a working definition of internet governance. And it thereby recognized the role of the technical community which manages the internet. Think of the IIRs, think of ICANN. ICANN didn't exist for that long at that point. And think of the IETF. So it basically gave our community a place in the UN system. This is the place where our communities are recognized in the UN system. It defined the IGF as a place for coordination between several stakeholders about how do we deal with the issues of the information society, or how do we deal with digital issues in our societies. And it set out an agenda which focused on how do we make sure that everybody has equity when we deal in with the information society. So if you look at the document, you will see a number of action items. I believe it's sort of 9 or so, that talk about financial support, that talk about deployment, talk about basically enabling the world to reap the benefits of the information society. The logos and so on and so forth on the bottom give you a little bit of a sense for this community for when this happened. 2003, AMD introduces the 64-bit architecture with Athlon. 2003, the DVD was invented. I thought the DVD was much older, but that's 2003. Google had its IPO in 2004. The Arduino was first offered in 2005. ICANN was 7 years old, and Afrinic became operational in 2004. And by the way, 2005, Linus Torvald introduced Git, on which we are all dependent nowadays. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of how old, if you talk in digital years, this document is. So I talked about the Tunis agenda, and the critical paragraph over there is paragraph 34, which sits in the internet governance paragraph. And at the end of the presentation, if you download it, you find a link to this Tunis agenda. You can look it up for yourself and read it. And I would recommend reading this internet governance paragraph. It says that the working definition of internet governance is the development and application by governments, the private sector, and civil society in the respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, and decision-making, procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. This is the definition that basically defines multi-stakeholderism. And a few paragraphs later, the technical and academic community are specifically called out in the maintenance of the internet resources. So with this agenda, there was also a process established to review whether, so in UN terms, whether progress has been made on these action items. And so there's an annual process by the Commission of Science and Technology, the CSTD, which hangs under ECOSOC, which is the Economic and Social Council of the UN General Assembly. That's basically nation states getting together and looking at a report that comes out of the annual WSIS Forum. The annual WSIS Forum is a relatively open meeting organized by the ITU. So that WSIS Forum looks at the state of the action items every year and then reports to the CSTD. Those nation states basically review, give a stamp. But every 10 years, there's a high-level review on how far did we get. There was one in 2015, and now we're 20 years later, hence WSIS plus 20. There is a 20 years review. And it is a high-level meeting by the UN General Assembly, taking stock of what outcomes have been accomplished, identified how to proceed forward in the future. And that last sentence gives a little bit, raises a little bit of a concern. Because what happens if that review means we actually don't like the way that we've done it for the past 20 years? That is a risk to the system. So why do we care? And in this context, it's ISOC. Well, ISOC, for us, really, the multi-stakeholder approach for the management of the internet is fundamental. That recognition of the multi-stakeholder process recognizes ICANN, the IIRs, the TLD registries, the IETF, the internet technical community more broadly, and their role in maintaining this thing that we call the internet. And that's in contrast to a multilateral and a treaty-based management of the internet. That's more centralized, more, well, it has a completely different culture, I would say. The second reason why we care is, of course, because of the development agenda that WSIS maintains. At the Internet Society, in our strategy for 2030, we have explicitly the phrase, people everywhere have access to affordable, reliable, and resilient internet. And that resonates a lot with the action items. So we have something to talk about, and we have something to offer to this international community saying, you know, we contributed. We have brought the internet to multiple places. We have trained people. We have built internet exchange point and so on and so forth. And we have enabled people to take their own destiny in, for instance, building community networks. The second part is that people everywhere have an internet experience that's safe, secure, and protects them online. And that sort of speaks to, you know, the outcome of another process, the GDC. But I'm not going to go into that because we really care because the internet is a set of choices. We talked about this morning in our policy program as well. The way that we approach the development of the internet, the incremental building block approach, the open processes that we have in this community, in the ICANN community, in the IR communities, that is a choice, and it determines the evolution of the internet. And if you change that choice, you change the internet. So this is why we think this is very important, and of course I hope that you share that vision. So where are we? A small timeline. People who were here the last time might recognize this slide. It's adapted from the GDC timeline. The GDC was a process that looked at the digital society as a whole, a new process. It had a number of outcomes, including a bunch of action items. And one of the things that we need to figure out going forward is how that outcome of the GDC informs the WSIS outcome. But we are now at the beginning of 2025, at that second half here. What just happened is that the UN is negotiating the modalities, so the way of working of this conference. The intent is to have an outcome document in December 16 and 17. That's a sort of UN conference at the highest level, UNGA type of stuff. But we're now still figuring out how this process is going to work, and there is somewhat known, and this is the place where there is some form of stakeholder consultation. What that is going to look like and how we, technical community, can impact the process is still a little bit of a question mark. However, we know a little bit. This is the timeline that we know of. There will be input an elements paper written by the co-facilitators. Co-facilitators are Kenya and Lithuania. Two countries are basically appointed to, diplomats of two countries are appointed to lead this process. And they will write an input elements paper. And that will happen in the time frame when there is an IGF and a WSIS, a high-level forum. High-level forum is 7 and 11 July, and the IGF is the 23rd to the 27th in June. And this is an opportunity to basically put in your talking points, your points of view, your ideas, and so on and so forth. But this is also the time that governments are making up their minds about their positions. So this is another way that we can input wherever possible our ideas. After that, in that time frame, so let's say in December we need an output. Before that, there is a month of negotiation, which is based on a first draft, which is there for a month, which is based on a zero draft, which is there for a month, so say October to December. There will be documents, but it is expected that those documents will be negotiated by states, that there is very little opportunities for stakeholders to get involved. We don't know yet. That's part of these modalities. So what is our time frame for input? Really, June, July. Let's see. We have an approach, and of course we are coordinating, but I sincerely believe that the IETF and the IAB has its own approach. We have published our approach on in summary, we are about, we want to focus on sharpening the WSIS action lines. They need to be technology neutral. The outcome of this previous process, the GDC, that also has set a bunch of action lines that are not yet in the WSIS action lines, could be incorporated. That makes total sense to us, but that is something that is under negotiation. We believe that the multi-stakeholder approach is the only meaningful approach going forward. Needs to be Net Mundial 10 plus 10 compatible, which basically means that the Net Mundial principles were reviewed, or how do you say that, last year in a process called Net Mundial plus 10, and that sets a number of principles for multi-stakeholder processes. So compatibilities with those processes. And it needs to recognize the existing power asymmetries that exist in the world. We are strongly in favor of evolving the Internet Governance Forum. It's an existing forum. It works. I'm not saying the word well after that. It can absolutely improve. But it is a good place for people to come together to norm, form, and storm, and bring their experiences back to the national level. And what we will do is we will use our staff, our communities, and our partners to provide input to the process wherever we can. We have 140, over 100,000 members. We have 140 chapters. So we'll use our community, and I frankly consider us, part of that community too, to try and impact that process. And one of the places where that can happen is, for instance, in the context of national IGFs or national consultations. If you are in an area and you have a local chapter, please figure them out. See if you can collaborate. If you have entry points into your government, bring speaking points. Let your government know that we exist. That was our pace. If you look at the IETF and you look at the WSIS action lines and you go through the action lines and say, what did the IETF do on these action lines? It's very hard to make a one-to-one mapping. But in essence, the IETF building blocks are, the IETF building blocks are, and the internet itself are enablers for digital prosperity. Those WSIS action lines would not have existed without the accomplishments of those action lines cannot be done without the existence of the internet, and the internet doesn't exist without our building blocks. I believe that the open nature of our output, of the IETF, the full transparency, the almost aggressive transparency, all drafts are published, all RCs are published, actually enables the bridging the digital divide. People can contribute from all over the world, and people can read the specifications and build product all over the world. We need to recognize that stakeholder diversity is somewhat problematic, and we're having that conversation. We're having the conversations about diversity. We have improved our ways of participating, so there is something to say there. And we have a multitude of research groups that actually do work that contribute to a better understanding of digital divides, of, for instance, the environmental impact of our work. More importantly, the IETF is actually an exemplary technical community. It's one of the shepherds of the open internet, and part of that internet governance fabric. It's fully transparent, it's open, it's accountable. It's an example of how you do multi-stakeholder engagement. Now, not all stakeholders always are here, but it's fully approachable and it's fully open. So I think we can set an example, and that's another thing that I would argue. So that's it. I'm going to hand over to somebody else, and I think that's Ian. And this is the device by which we'll make it happen, of course.
Yeah, we should have some time at the end for general discussion or open mic. And since I see no one in the queue or anywhere, so Ian, let's go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Ian Sheldon. I'm the Director of Internet Governance from the Australian Government Department of Infrastructure and many other things. My team will be leading the Australian Government's engagement in the WSIS review process. We try and cover as many internet organizations and forums as we can, and the WSIS process will be a big focus for us this year. I'm not going to reiterate a lot of Olaf's points because I think I'd like to start by wholeheartedly endorsing a lot of the core messages and points that he made in his discussion. The WSIS review process will be quite a complicated review happening over this year. We like to think of the WSIS action lines as the digital version of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They're going to be quite broad, all-encompassing, and importantly, they will very likely touch on the internet and internet governance. My message for you here today is quite a simple one. I think you all in this room have fantastic expertise. You know and understand the internet. those at the negotiating table, potentially when the doors close and exclude multi-stakeholder engagement, those diplomats may not understand the internet, and they will very likely not understand it to the extent that you all in this room do. So what I wanted to do today is I guess shed a little bit of light on the government's mindset as we go through this process. I don't think government does a particularly good job at explaining how we think, how we operate, and some of the considerations we make as we go through this process. So I had a couple of key messages for this community as you consider the WSIS review process. So the technical community, including the IETF community, as I said, are absolutely critical and central to the global internet. Many governments know this. Some governments, like myself, try and get involved in these conversations, but many don't. And a lot of governments are really trying to figure out how they can regulate, how they can manage digital issues, including the technical management of the internet. The WSIS Plus 20 review process is an opportunity to construct a new normative environment for the internet, digital development, and the wider digital world. But like Olaf said, there are multiple paths ahead. We are just getting started in the WSIS review process. The modalities were just agreed last week, and so the substantive negotiations haven't started. But there's a good chance that they could go in any number of directions, and it's vital that we are clear-eyed on what's important to us and what kind of digital future we'd like to shape for everybody. The internet's had an excellent history of delivering fantastic benefits to the global community, but past circumstance and historical context doesn't necessarily give us future social license. As I said, a lot of governments are thinking hard about how we regulate digital systems, how we regulate the internet, and we're a little bit of a pivot point, I think, in the WSIS review process. So we can't rely on the past 20 plus years to shepherd us through the next 20. And so it's really important that we get as many parts of the community involved in this process as we can. Standards do not live in isolation. I know this community is very much focused on the building blocks of the internet, but they exist in relation to content, infrastructure, and broader digital development questions. So the IETF's work does have institutional impacts on the internet for governments. And I'm quite keen to continue, I guess, having those conversations. I know you give consideration to some of those broader challenges as you think through the standards development, as you make decisions in the work you do in this forum. And so I think it's that connection line between the work you do all the way up to the broad conversations that'll be happening in the General Assembly, to my mind, is clear. The value of the expert-led standards making processes is, of course, essential to the internet's future. But showcasing the value of this for all, including governments, is critical. I'm not sure the internet as a community does a particularly good job at really showcasing all of the fantastic work that does occur, all of the benefits that have been developed. I think the world takes a lot of it for granted, and I think a lot of governments don't quite understand all the benefits that the multi-stakeholder community have afforded to a lot of their domestic jurisdictions. The WSIS Plus 20 review process is a vital opportunity to showcase a lot of this really good work and remind governments of the fantastic work that you all do here. And finally, the technical community needs to learn how to speak government a little better. It's a big ask, I know, And I know there are a lot of you in this room who go a long way to trying to bridge that gap. But I do know that there will be a lot of governments who aren't interested in closing that gap on their side. That they're not as keen, that they're not coming to these IETF meetings and getting up on the stage and talking about these issues. So I think I'd very much encourage this community to reach out to your local governments, talk to them, tell them you're interested, tell them you're keen, and importantly, offer your expertise. A lot of governments don't have that expertise in their wheelhouse. Most of them are policy officers who come from general backgrounds. Certainly the negotiators in New York and Geneva will have development backgrounds, that they won't have cyber or technical internet backgrounds. And so if there's an opportunity for you all to offer your expertise to those negotiators, to the preparatory processes for governments, I think that'd be a fantastic start. And the final thing I'll say is I would very much encourage this community to organise, get involved in some of the processes that Olaf outlined, and find ways to articulate your thoughts and views and perspectives on this, because I think the time is now to be clear, to be loud, to be forward-leaning, and to make sure that this review process does take into consideration a lot of the values that this community embodies and espouses. So I genuinely don't know how many in this room are already following this process. And one of my core ambitions for coming here today is getting a better sense for who is following this process, who is interested, who is keen to have a discussion. The Australian government's preparatory process for WSIS is very much open and transparent, and we'd welcome expertise from whatever corner we can take it from. Yep, thank you. Keen to have that discussion and questions.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions, discussion points that people want to bring up now? Again, we'll have some time for open comments and discussion at the end. Oh, and we have Pete. Stay up here. Oh.
Let's try that again. Aha. This is Pete Resnick, and this battery sounds like it's iffy.
Take two.
This any better?
Yeah.
Excellent. Generally speaking, as someone from the US, I don't have a local government that's useful to go to, and that hasn't been much of a problem in the past because plus or minus, it's been relatively easy to know what they're going to talk about, and ISOC gives them pretty good input when needed. Is there something to do useful at this point? Is there something to worry about at this point? Do we even know what the US position is at the moment, avoiding mentioning certain elephants in certain rooms?
I certainly can't speak to the US's position on this. But you know, I guess what I will say is that certainly if your local government is not receptive to your expertise, there are many others who are. I think it's important to be clear, articulate, and direct in the advice provided. And there'll be many receptive opportunities to take that feedback on board, whether it's through governments like myself, whether it's through ISOC, or whether it's through other IGF processes like your local Internet Governance Forum as well.
All right. Jean?
Yeah, Jean-François. In your experience, so it has been my experience since I started participating in the IGF back in 2018, I think it was. I barely see too many people from the technical community. And the first time that I saw a resurgence was in Kyoto 2023, when the IAB had people over there, Rasperch has a presentation, et cetera, et cetera. And yet it's supposed to be covering all the breadth of conversations that have to do with the internet. So the governance should be not only on the policy side, but also with the technology that is in fact making possible that the internet exists to begin with. And so I always found that it was a bit of a cognitive dissonance, that there were not enough sessions or even people. I would say in a very generous estimate, 85% of the people over there were policy oriented and barely 15 would be technical community. And I'm being very, very generous on that 15%. So my question would be, do you think that there's any impact on the MAG as to what the composition of the MAG has been historically, to make sure that there's been more participation by the technical community? Do you think that would be a way for us to have a bit more presence? Or do you think there's a way, maybe it is the amount of submissions that are sent, and then who's the reviewing committee? Because that's another thing, if you don't have the qualifications or the interest to bring more technical conversations, then maybe just ignore them. What would be your take on that?
So I know there are many others in this room who are deeply familiar with the IGF and the MAG, but I think it's a reflection on the amount of interest and contributions and submissions made from the technical community. You know, I think the IGF should be reflective of communities' interests and desires. I know the MAG does an extraordinary job at balancing all of the community's submissions and proposals. The last IGF saw an extraordinary effort churning through a huge number of proposals. The only advice I would provide is provide more proposals, organize, make your views known, and take part in the process. Unfortunately, I do think the submission process for the MAG proposals have closed a couple of days ago now. But that shouldn't preclude this community from taking part in the IGF's discussions and coming to the forum and sitting at the table and sharing your technical community's perspectives.
Thank you.
All right, Dan? And to that last point, you know, the IAB is involved in making proposals there. So there are things that are planned.
Dan Bogdanovich. So I tried a couple of times to address certain things with my congressman. There were two different ones. And in general, if it's not in the news, they don't care. Literally. You can try to reach out of them and they'll, yeah, nice, but nothing happens, nothing follows up. So I don't know how is the situation in Europe, but I have friends in Europe and, you know, I've been also talking to them. And some of their political representatives, they don't even have a way how to communicate to them. So there's a question how we could even inform the legislature and tell them this is our concerns going forward. And there's much more concern about how to control the internet than to leave it open. And if they're doing the mentalities, if they're doing, we should be doing. And I've been thinking about that, but I don't see how you could change except by providing technical standards that are open and that that it's not easy to turn it around. By accident, I found out that the two largest buyers of Tofino chips were two government entities. And you can think what they're using it for. So this one part that if you have some idea, suggestion, that you can send information that will not end up in the, I don't want to say the spam folder, but the do not care folder, let us know.
I think it's an issue that's been posed quite a number of times. It's a conversation I'm very keen to have, to explore different ways to frame that messaging, to make sure we work through. And certainly, I think again, the advice I'd provide is talk to the governments who are here, and help tailor some of that messaging so it is more receptive to governments. And certainly, it's an ongoing challenge even within my administration. You know, how do we articulate and clearly communicate those values that underpin the internet in terms that that our politicians understand and appreciate. So there is no magic bullet to help politicians take note of some of these things, but very happy to sit down and work through some of that messaging if it's of value.
The only time they cared where it was, I think it was 2014, when there was the net neutrality and then the EFF created a campaign, and this is the only time when the politicians were caring a little bit about it.
All right. Tommy?
To follow up on that, how valuable do you see the kind of efforts made by industry to join together and do coalitions or movements where there's a Chatham House statement made? Are those more productive on large government scales than individual? Okay, head nod, great. So then my other question is, I do agree that we all need to become multilingual across government and technical. For the life of me, I cannot get Duo or Rosetta to explain to me how I translate digital sovereignty and internet fragmentation in a meaningful way where we get past the concept that digital sovereignty cannot and will not ever be the same as geospatial sovereignty. Do you have any hints for how we can effectively speak about that without sounding like we're just insisting that we can't be governed? No pressure.
Look, I mean,
We may not have time to unpack all of that.
You've kind of struck on one of the core issues that we know will be grappled with through the WSIS review process. How do we, what does that national sovereignty look like? How do we, how do governments work through some of the challenges? I'd love to have that conversation when there's a little bit more time and breathing room, but yeah, it's a big, tricky, thorny issue, and many governments have different approaches to this as well. It's not one size fits all.
Sarah.
Hey, Sarah Jennings, UK Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. I recognize from a lot of people in the room, right, that getting involved in these conversations seems recurring, challenging, difficult to translate. You feel like you're banging your head against the wall, and sometimes for not necessarily a huge amount of gain. One thing I will say is that the shared norms that a lot of people in this community have can't be taken for granted, right? They're constantly upheld through continuous messaging. And I've heard it said that the IETF kind of doesn't get its legitimacy necessarily from things like the Tunis Agenda. It gets its legitimacy through output, right? Through the work that it does and the protocols that it produces. But you really need to shout about that, right? Really need to continually advocate for the work that you do, the capability that you have, the kind of fact that the internet works because of the people who come to these meetings and get involved in these mailing lists. And when it comes to kind of explaining how some of the technical concepts that you advocate for might not necessarily align with some of the policy decisions that governments want to make, I think that is just a case of continually making that point. And coalitions are really helpful, but things even like open letters are incredibly helpful. I know that there was one before the GDC. And whilst you may not get necessarily a response from governments, you can rest assured that those are being heard and are being listened to. If you are struggling to get in touch with your government, there are organizations that can help, advocacy organizations, groups like ISOC or EFF or kind of your local regional chapters. But also there are policymakers at the IETF. If you want to come and have a chat, right, and get involved and talk to us, we're here, we're open. We're here to have that conversation with you guys, right, to be that kind of link and that intercept between these two communities. So please come and talk to us, and we'll see what we can do and see how we can help.
Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Campling. A couple of thoughts. And Jean-Francois was saying about maybe if I reinterpret the point, it's the lack of technical stakeholders in the IGF. To be fair, that's not my experience. There's certainly a lot of panel members, for example, from the technical community, and there are no barriers stopping any of us putting forward workshop proposals other than, as you said, the deadline was Sunday. So if you weren't paying attention, tough. But you know, there are no impediments to that engagement. We probably shouldn't be surprised that governments have an expectation that they can govern. So that might be against the sort of the libertarian ethos, but it is kind of their job. The clue's in what they're there for. But maybe, I mean, the other thought perhaps for this community is there've been a few proposals how to better engage with policymakers, which we push back on. Maybe we ought to reflect that there's a price in not making it as easy for policymakers to engage with us. When we have things like WSIS plus 20, there's some downsides to those decisions that we took when we sort of pushed back on some proposals, what, a year, 2 years ago. Having more policymakers here would have made it easier to influence their thinking. So just the thought that there's a price in putting up barriers in engaging here, in my view.
I think I might offer one comment. The WSIS process will very likely remain incredibly high level. If the negotiations go down to the level of the work that takes place in this community, the negotiations have gone down a very, very different path to one that I think we were expecting it to. But if it does go down that path, those relationships with policymakers will be vital. And so the message I do want to leave you with is don't wait for the WSIS review process. Don't wait for the house to be on fire. Build those relationships, make sure they're ongoing, enduring, and that trust is there, because we get through the WSIS plus 20 review process. We're looking at the ITU plenipotentiary the year after, and we're looking at the 2030 review of the Sustainable Development Goals shortly after that. So there will be quite a number of other challenges on the horizon for this community to consider and get involved in. So don't think of it as a point in time thing we need to get past.
Just an answer to a question that was just asked. The gentleman was saying, I cannot get to my legislator. It's often the executive branch that you want to talk to, because those are preparing the negotiations and so on and so forth. So if you have entry points there, and sometimes people have, those are fairly good entry points to get a contact and find your way into the government and find what the government position is. It often depends on having personal contacts.
All right, thank you so much. So now we're going to go into a bit of context from the IETF's perspective in engagement here. Thank you. And yeah, do you want to dunk the clicker?
Sure. Hello. If you look at the agenda, it said that Mark Nottingham was going to be up here. I'm not Mark. I'm Alvaro. Mark is not feeling too well, so he couldn't be here today. So yes, this part we're going to talk a little bit about the IETF and how we relate to the process. As we have already been talking about today, we are a big part of the technical community. And the technical community is, of course, part of that multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance. So it is important that we, as IETF members, as members of the technical community, are seen as being able to defend the multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance. We are not a body that needs any type of license to operate or anything along those lines, but at the same time, we don't live in isolation. As was mentioned before, our technology is going to live inside the context of wherever it's implemented, whether that be a company, a country, whatever it is. We need to be able to defend the framework within where the IETF exists, and something that we have helped shape over the last 30 plus years, way before WSIS came around. So how are we engaging? The bottom line here, the guiding principle, is that we want to talk about the IETF, not for the IETF. We all understand, and many of you are seasoned participants in the IETF. We all understand about the consensus process. We all understand when we speak for the IETF or about the IETF. And what we want to do is speak about what we do, how we do it, not necessarily present conclusions for the IETF. So there's already engagement from the IAB and the IETF chair in the stakeholder consultations. We not only engage with that in terms of proposing answers to the consultations, in engaging with different legislations across the world, etc. But we also participate in the meetings themselves. So over the past year or two, there have been specific proposals from the IAB to the AGFs, for example, on different workshops and different things to get the word out a lot more. And as everyone has said before, everyone here is encouraged to talk to your national or regional consultation about this as well. So we prepared some messages, call them talking points. None of what I'm going to say here are canned phrases or anything like that. And none of this should come as a surprise to anyone of what are the things we want to talk about. Number one is we want to talk about the fact that the IETF provides the building blocks. We are the main venue, the premier venue for developing technical standards that are going to result in that well-functioning, secure, trustworthy, unfragmented internet. These standards are the building blocks, right? We build the different pieces across the whole stack in routing and transport and the internet layer, the DNS, et cetera, security, even apps that are going to assure that we have an interoperable, non-discriminatory, demand-driven internet that is constantly evolving, or that can constantly evolve. So we are the ones that are providing those building blocks. And this goes in line, if you go back and read the WSIS action lines and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, this goes in line with all that we want the internet to evolve. We don't, as a whole, want it to be static. So this is easy because every one of us participates in different working groups that take place in those different building blocks of the internet. Number two, the IETF is open. It is an open venue where anyone can participate. It is extremely transparent. Every document is online. The process is open, is visible, all the minutes, all the decisions, everything is on the mailing lists, on the data tracker, everything is open and transparent so that anyone can see it, anyone can participate, and anyone can provide input to the process itself. Everything, of course, is fully available. So the results, all the RFCs, all the standards that we actually produce are open and available to everyone. We are obviously continuously improving our diversity. There are tools that we use for that. Online participation, that it is wide and open, not just through MeetEcho for the meetings that we have. Sessions like this one, for example, is being streamed on YouTube right now. So anyone can watch what we're doing, and anyone can participate from anywhere in the world. There has been training and awareness and processes that try to take into account cultural differences. And we are always seeking to find ways to understand and better improve our work on how we engage with other stakeholders, including policymakers and other people that contribute and participate in our process. And number three, the IETF promotes good internet governance. Our process is a mature process, even though some of us may think that it's a long process, etc. It is a mature process for developing the internet infrastructure. And it is something that's constantly evolving. One key characteristic of the ecosystem in the IETF is that we have the ability to look at ourselves and revise our processes. That's why we're always looking at how we can change, how we can make all our BCPs better, etc. Even though not all the issues that show up on the internet, we're calling them digital issues here, are because of the internet itself, but some may be enabled because of the connectedness that we have across the internet. We have enabled with our building blocks that we built. The approach that we use, the multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance, allows that ability of the internet to grow and constantly evolve, which is again why we need to support and defend the model and the definition as it is today, so that it keeps working that way and it doesn't necessarily need to be reopened as to whether, especially from the point of view of the technical community, that it is an important part for us to be part of this process. So, as I said, these three things, we promote good internet governance, we are an open organization, and we provide the building blocks are basically three messages that we should take out into the world that reflect everything that we already know that we do here in the IETF.
All right, and we got a bunch of people in line. We have 4 minutes left, so just let's just get some quick feedback talking points. There will definitely be more opportunities to discuss. We'd love to hear things to the IAB list, architecture, discuss, etc. Go ahead, Dan.
Dejan Bogdanovic, on diversity, we got an evaluation from a diversity person this summer about some of our processes, and we got a passing note. That was a pretty good review when we received it in September. There are things that we could be improving, and some of the processes that we are using are hurting our diversity because we haven't changed them really in 20 years. And there are some updates that we have to do. And this is mainly around our leadership selection, where after looking for that and analyzing, there's a lot of unconscious bias happening due to certain circumstances. And I think that could be helpful. On the governance, I think we can contribute a lot and make some of the proposals. So some of those mature processes are good, but sometimes we're not willing to experiment enough, and we rely too much on, oh, let's try to move the mountain instead of let's try to do it in a few smaller pieces. So this would be the only times that we should find a better balance between some of the mature processes and opportunity to do some experiments.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karim. I have a small question. Do IETF really prepared to take part on IGF and WSIS? Because I'm a MAG member, former member, and IGF, it's a process meeting. So right now, a thematic workshop, all those activities are undergone. So do IETF already prepared to take part, involved on those activities? Thank you.
So I'm going to say that, yes, we have been participating, our IAB membership and the IETF chair for a number of years have been participating in the meetings themselves. Right, so this is not something that we are taking on this year or that is happening right now. It has been, as you said, a process. And as part of that process is that we have been discussing what is happening now with, say, WSIS this year. and why we believe it was important for the rest of the community to be aware of that as well. Thank you.
Dimitri.
Hi, Dimitri Kuznetsov from the University of Amsterdam. I just wanted to ask one question and leave a comment based on that question. First, in the previous slide, in one of the statements, there is mention of having, yes, a interoperable, non-discriminatory, and demand-driven internet that can evolve. I would want to know whose demand is being referred to here. And another thing, and building on that, I think it is important to recognize that while it may appear to many that this is a fairly neutral statement, the idea of having a non-discriminatory and demand-driven internet is not necessarily the goal that some representatives engaged in the WSIS process will want to achieve. So by presenting this combined with the idea of presenting the IETF as an open forum does open up an opportunity for the discussion of whether a non-interoperable and discriminatory model would have an opportunity to be considered if these voices become more common in the community. That would be all. So, but to reaffirm the question, I want to know whose demand is being considered here.
That's a wonderful question. So as I said, these are Mark's slides. So,
pass that buck.
Thank you. I'm going to, my interpretation of the demand-driven has to, are you going to say something? Okay, go.
So I mean, I think this is actually a point which is more complex, but one of the things where we have problems to communicate is that, like, you cannot just, and this is exactly what you mean, I think, you cannot just tell the IETF, we have these requirements, they are really important, you have to make the internet secure, whatever, and you have to do it. People actually have to come and do the work in the IETF because we cannot force anybody to do anything, and we don't have the work power. So that means also that, you know, there actually has to be somebody who is willing to put the resources in to actually make it going forward, and that's kind of the demand, I think, that we are meaning here.
Yeah, if I can add to that, the other thing that I'm interpreting here about us doing the building blocks is that this demand-driven has also to do with permissionless innovation, with the ability for you to take the building blocks and build on top of those.
Vittorio.
Hi, Vittorio Bertola, speaking in personal capacity. So first of all, I totally agree with the theory of the multi-stakeholder model. I was actually there 20 years ago. I was a member of the wiki. I was one of the people that materially wrote the working definition of internet governance, invented the IGF and everything. And I hope we continue. So it's good that we are try to make this continue. But I've been sitting here for like 59 minutes, and not once I heard any kind of form of self-criticism for the failures of the multi-stakeholder model, which are the reasons why now governments, even the governments that in the past have been strong supporters, like Europe, now have some rethinking of how this is working, or have started just to regulate the internet. So you use all the usual slogans like the open decentralized architecture of the internet, but are we really sure that the internet today is still open decentralized? Because I don't think so. I mean, if you look, 20 years ago we had news groups and blogs, now we have Facebook. Or like every time I use the internet, 90% of the time I have to start with searching a single search engine by a single company. So this is what you will hear in reply when you go to governments, to people, and you talk about these points. You talk about digital prosperity. Digital prosperity for whom? I mean, you talk about the unfragmented internet. The unfragmented internet gave, deprived us of privacy and turned our countries into digital colonies. So you have to be prepared to answer to these objections, to show how the multi-stakeholder model can address these problems. Otherwise, the people will just not listen to you. Thank you.
Andrew.
Yeah, completely agree.
Just briefly on your previous slide, to be critical for a moment, I think two thoughts. The improving its diversity is generous, and we would have to acknowledge starting from a really poor base. Yes, it's improved, but if you're at 1%, you're now at 2%. It's still only 2%. Brisbane, I think we had less than, was it 7% female participation, for example, in the meeting. If you go to the IGF in Riyadh, of all places, the representation from the Global South was pretty fantastic. The sort of gender diversity was far higher than it is here. So I think we have to be humble about our diversity. It's poor. It's marginally better, but it's still poor. And then just briefly, secondly, on the open bit, again, I think open is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. It's open if people know about us and are prepared to come and look. We're very inward facing. We don't spend that much time going outwards and engaging better elsewhere. So I think we have to be a little bit humble and acknowledge where we could improve an awful lot to become better and more relevant. Thanks.
A little bit of a response to the openness, though. Like, totally acknowledge that within IETF working groups, yeah, they're often focused on their own engineering problems, and I think it is, you know, the IAB's role to try to make sure that we have the outreach and the interaction outside. But then also some of the earlier points, I do want to emphasize for anyone here that policymakers and these other stakeholders are absolutely welcome, and when they engage in our process, it does make it better.
Can I add to this point quickly? So I think what this slide is implicitly saying, not explicitly, is also that actually being open is not enough. You have to keep working on getting people getting in diversity. And I think we are doing this. We are investing a lot in this. Also, if you compare us to other SDOs, I think we have a lot of programs. I agree that it's not enough because it's also not an easy problem, and it's not a problem that we in this community can solve completely on our own, unfortunately.
Sure. Our documentation about the processes is very well done for the DEI perspective, but participation in the IETF is an economical privilege that we don't know how to solve. And then this is, you know, the difference how we can drive diversity within our community, but it's becoming mainly economical privilege.
All right, we are over time, but thank you all for taking your time to discuss this with us. I think hearing these different perspectives, thank you, Olaf, thank you, Ian, thank you all for sharing this. Hopefully we've, you know, all been able to get something out of this, and in the coming months, the IAB and ISOC will be working together to you know, continually refine these, prepare our inputs into IGF, into the WSIS process, and we welcome everyone in the community's feedback and input into that, and we can all figure out how to make sure that this process goes well. Thank you all.